Hello everybody, welcome to the channel. Come with me as we explore a forgotten warming tool that was used in the 18th century during the winter life. Welcome everybody. We have heaters of all sorts, furnaces, electric blankets, and we have just better shoes to keep our feet warm. But what was it like in the 1700s when they didn't have the technological sophistication that we have today? Join me as we explore the forgotten journey in history of foot stoves. That's right. Comment below if you've ever heard of anything like this called the foot stoves. Imagine in a bitter winter morning in the 1700s, snow drifts quietly against the wooden walls of a small colonial home. Outside, the wind pushes across the open fields, frozen roads. Inside, the fire in the fireplace struggles to keep the entire house warm. Even with thick wool coats and shawls, the cold creeps slowly through the floorboards and gets deep in our bones. For many people living in the 18th century, warmth was never guaranteed. Fireplaces heated only parts of the room, and fuel was precious. Large houses might have multiple fireplaces, but most of the time they only had one. So people turned to a small but ingenious solution, a device simple in design, yet important for everyday life: the foot stove. And I don't mean the stove where you cook your food on top of. At first glance, a foot stove looks like a small wooden box with the decorative metal panels or vents on the sides. It was usually about the size of a shoebox, sometimes larger, and often had a handle on top for carrying around like a basket. Inside the wooden box sat a small metal container filled with hot coals taken from the fireplace. Once these coals were placed inside, the stove slowly radiated heat outward, warming the space around the person's feet or legs. In a time where central heating, radiation, and electric blankets and heaters did not exist, this humble box became a portable source of warmth during the coldest months of the year. And the owner could take it everywhere with them. Unlike electric heaters, where you plug into the wall and it's right there stationary, foot stoves were especially common in Northern Europe, and they could be taken all over the place, and also colonial America, where winters were notably harsh. In places like New England, winters regularly froze rivers, buried roads under deep snow. Wooden homes were drafty, and insulation was minimal. The floors were incredibly cold as well. Sitting still for long periods of time when you're in church services or at school, it was unbearable with the cold. But a small box filled with glowing embers changed everything. Before leaving home, a person would take a small shovel or iron tongs and carefully place hot coals from the fireplace into a metal pan inside this foot stove, and the lid would close, and then this would be used to radiate a gentle, comfortable warmth, heat. Placed on the floor beneath a chair or bench, it warmed the feet of whoever sat nearby. Sometimes a blanket or cloak would be draped over their lap, trapping the heat underneath. This effect was surprisingly comfortable, a quiet pocket of warmth in a cold world. One of the places the foot stoves became most famous was inside the 18th century churches. That's right, church buildings were rarely heated during that time. Large open rooms with tall ceilings made heating nearly impossible with just a fireplace. Sunday services could last for hours. Men, women, and children sat in wooden pews while icy air seeped through stone walls and wooden doors. So families brought their foot stoves from home. Rows of parishioners would sit quietly with small wooden heaters placed beneath their feet, glowing softly with the warmth of the home carried into the cold sanctuary. In some churches, there were even workers whose job was to maintain the coals. These workers were called sexton boys or stove tenders. During long services, they moved quietly through the aisles, checking the stoves of everybody and replacing the dying coals with fresh new ones so that the congregation can stay warm. It must have been quite the sight to see that. A silent church, wooden pews, soft candlelight, and dozens of small footstoves glowing faintly beneath the benches. But churches were not the only place where these heaters came to use. Footstoves were common companions during travel as well. Take yourself back. Imagine a horse drawn carriage moving slowly along a snowy road. The wind pushes through the wooden carriage walls as air inside grows bitterly cold. Passengers wrapped in heavy cloaks huddle together for warmth. At their feet sits a small wooden stove filled with hot coals to keep them warm. The gentle heat helps make the long journey slightly more bearable. In fact, some stagecoaches and sleighs specifically allowed space for foot stoves during winter travel. Even in the workplaces, these devices were often used. Shopkeeper, Shopkeepers standing behind counters, clerks working long hours at the desk, and even school children sitting through winter lessons sometimes relied on foot stoves to keep warm. It's actually a pretty neat invention. Teachers in colonial classrooms would sometimes place a stove near the front desk while students took turns warming their feet. And for workers who spent long hours sitting still, such as scribes, accountants, or seamstress, the stove could make winter work possible. Without it, they would have frozen toes and fingers and would quickly end the day's productivity and work. Despite their usefulness, foot stoves required careful attention because they contained live coals. There's always a risk of fire. That is why the wooden box included perforated metal panels and grates. These allowed the heat to escape while preventing embers from falling out. But still, accidents did happen. If a stove tipped over, hot coals would spill onto wooden floors and clothing. For this reason, many of the foot stoves were designed with sturdy metal liners. Some were even decorated. It was quite a work of art. By the 18th century, craftsmen began adding intricate designs to the metal panels, patterns of flowers, stars, geometric shapes, and in wealthier homes, the foot stoves were really elegant. Carved wooden frames, polished brass panels, decorative handles transformed these things into more than just heaters, but small pieces of art. Even the simplest versions, the plain wooden boxes, served a purpose. They provided warmth where there was hardly any. Over time, however, the foot stove slowly faded away from everyday use. During the 19th century, technological advances transformed how heating was done in people's homes and buildings. Cast iron stoves became more common, allowing entire rooms to be warmed more efficiently than before. Later came coal burning furnaces and eventually steam heating systems. By the late 1800s, large public buildings, churches, schools, meeting halls began installing central heating. The need to carry personal heat in a small wooden box slowly began to disappear. Foot stoves were no longer necessary. What had once been a daily winter companion became a forgotten relic. Today, many surviving foot stoves rest quietly in museums, antique shops, or historical homes. Or you may even buy it on eBay. At first glance, they may appear simple, but there's a lot more to their design, and they have a long story of resilience, a story of people adapting to harsh winters with creativity and resourcefulness. In a world without electric heat, without insulation, without modern comfort, even a small pocket of warmth made a tremendous difference. And perhaps there is something quietly comforting about that. The idea that centuries ago, on cold winter mornings, much like our own, people gathered around glowing coals carried carefully inside their small boxes. Churchgoers warming their feet during long sermons, travelers riding through snowy countryside, workers and students trying to stay warm as they learned, all sharing the gentle warmth of this small, humble device. The foot stove may be largely forgotten today, but for generations of people living through cold winters of the 18th century, it was a small miracle of warmth, a glowing reminder that even the simplest inventions can make life a little more comfortable in the cold and uncertain world. Thank you for tuning in. If you like content like this, please consider subscribing to the channel. Until next time, have a good one.